Hi, I'm Kevin, and welcome to Ask a Stoic. Today's question deals with the second in a three-part series on spiritual exercises. We'll be focusing on the second division, which is physics, and the corresponding discipline of desire and aversion. Each of these disciplines corresponds with one of the divisions of philosophy. As we talked about previously, the study of physics, or physis, doesn't 100% correlate with the modern scientific discipline of physics, which can be a little confusing. It also incorporates theology, cosmology, sociology, parts of psychology, and really anything that our observation of the universe can produce. The discipline of desire is an attempt to regulate our desires more conformably to nature. What that means is not every urge that the body produces, that we have, is necessarily in accord with our highest and best natures. Humans have the pneumatic tension of lower creatures as well as that of rational creatures. So we can determine when desires are more animalistic or base, or when they correspond to our virtuous and moral character. Simply because something occurs to the human organism doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good. So how do we conform our desires with nature? It's a difficult question. And it's in fact so difficult that Epictetus suggests that students basically set it aside at the very beginning to attempt to distance themselves from all desire, not merely desire which is not conducive to philosophy. Because even when we focus our desires on things which we should desire to attain, such as a higher moral character or progress in philosophy, if we've not prepared ourselves, then we may find that we're still dismayed if we fall short. And we are prokopton. We're training. We are testing ourselves. And in training, one fails. In fact, we might even measure our progress by the number of failures. We will backslide. And in doing so, if we have not adequately prepared and we expect an unreasonable level of perfection, we may find ourselves dismayed or entertaining internal states which are not conducive to the study of philosophy. So even those things which we might rightly desire, the student is suggested to put aside for the time being. So what is an aversion? An aversion is something which we have deemed to be bad and reasonably want to put distance between ourselves. The issue here is whether we have a right understanding of good and evil. If we, like many folks, determine things of an external nature to be evil, then we would say be averse to not having enough money, or a sickness in the body, or exile, or separation from people we care about, or imprisonment. But we as students of philosophy realize that what we need to focus on are moral evils, which mean they lie within our will and within our own judgment. It might be in fact entirely conducive to our rational and moral character to undergo experiences of those things. If one had to do some horrible thing to acquire money, wouldn't it be better to be poor? If one had to betray all of the principles he holds dear to stay in his country rather than face exile, isn't exile preferable to training ourselves to such an evil? So each of these things which many folks might call an evil, for us are simply external indifference. But we have been training ourselves, and many times for years or decades, to be averse of those things. So if we find ourselves facing them, what we should in fact do is train the opposite. So if we are desirous of, say, material wealth, we should practice austerity. If we are desirous of, say, the intoxicating effects of wine or beer or any other substance, we should practice abstinence. At some point, there is probably a level of moderation which is acceptable for those things within the Stoic discipline. In fact, Epictetus specifically suggests moderation in the consumption of wine. But we're probably not there yet, and as such, maybe a pure abstinence is what's required for the student. That's not to say that temperance movements or anything like that is something that I think Stoicism would put forth. Certainly I don't think we're attempting to influence the legal systems of where we're living. But for ourselves and our personal choices, we have to ask ourselves, is this mental state conducive to philosophy? Does it increase my moral and rational nature? And if the answer is no, then we might need to take a break from it. So that kind of practical stepping back from things of which we are desirous, and when presented with things of which we are averse, to not flee or not experience those impulses towards aversion, to go ahead and think about them, to process them and accept them for what they are, is the first step. It's easy to kind of grok that theory that we should be desirous of some things and averse to others. But it can be very difficult to actually internalize that and realize that in a meaningful way. So while putting separation or abstaining from those things is itself a spiritual exercise, we have other spiritual exercises which fall within this domain. One that I think is particularly useful, especially for new students, because you can implement it immediately as soon as you understand the exercise, is that of objective description. If we have something for which we are desirous or averse, we can describe it objectively without attaching any value judgments. And by doing that, we can process it in a way that lets us determine whether our wanting or fear of it is in accordance with nature. So Marcus uses an example in his meditations for the human sex act, and he describes it as a friction between bits of gut and an expulsion of a mucus. Not a very sexy description of something that most people spend an awful lot of energy and effort attending to. We might describe a good steak as simply the heated flesh of an animal. We might describe wine as the crushed juices and the excrement of a certain yeast. Nothing about that is intrinsically desirous. If we have a favorite cup, I used to do pottery, and so I have lots of ceramic vessels around my house. I have maybe favorite ceramic cups. Well, Epictetus suggests that maybe we actually are just partial to cups in general. So if one breaks, it's simply an example of one thing that we have a preference for and isn't necessarily a loss to us. But we can also apply objective description. What do I like? A piece of cooked dirt with a glass-like surface. There's nothing really there that should pull us towards it in any really meaningful way. For things that we are averse, most people are afraid of illness or death. We can describe this in the same way. Death is a natural part of life. Everything that lives must die. For the theistic or deistically oriented people, it's been ordained by the cosmos or God. For the more secular Stoics, it's a consequence of the laws of physics. It's a consequence of the laws of entropy, thermodynamics, that things change and pass away and are dissolved. It would be unreasonable to find ourselves distressed by the natural process. So we can apply these descriptions to lots of things. So when we find ourselves presented with one of these things that we are either desirous of or averse to, we can describe it objectively. That gives us time to process it, and it puts it in a different light, which lets us weigh whether these impressions are actually towards the kind of goals we have. So I hope that that helps narrow down where within the field of physics and the discipline of desire and aversion, modern Stoics can begin to implement those spiritual exercises. Remember, if you have your own questions, you can answer them below in the comments or at mountainstoic.wordpress.com. Click Ask a Stoic on the left, use the form, and submit your question. Thanks for watching, and fate permitting, I'll see you next time.